Tasha Rodriguez had been looking forward to this night for weeks. Her 26th birthday celebration at Romano's Italian Bistro, where she worked as a waitress. She'd saved up for the perfect dress, a midnight blue number that hugged her curves just right, and had her hair styled in soft waves that cascaded over her shoulders. But as she sat alone at table 12, checking her phone for the 100th time, the empty chair across from her seemed to mock every hope she'd harbored for this evening. The man she'd been dating for 3 months, Marcus, had promised to make this birthday unforgettable, but now it was nearly 10 o'clock, and he was nowhere to be found. What she didn't know was that the distinguished gentleman at the bar, nursing a glass of aged whiskey and observing her quiet humiliation with growing concern, was about to change her life in ways she could never imagine. This wasn't just any customer watching her story unfold. This was someone who had the power to transform her world with a single signature. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The evening had started with such promise. Tasha had arrived at Romano's 2 hours before her shift ended, her heart fluttering with anticipation as she smoothed down her dress and checked her reflection in the restaurant's ornate mirrors. She'd worked at this upscale establishment for nearly 4 years, serving wealthy clientele who barely glanced her way. But tonight she felt different, special even. Her co-workers had decorated the break room with balloons and a small cake, singing happy birthday before she clocked out and transformed from server to customer. Marcus had texted her that morning with elaborate plans, promising dinner at 8, followed by dancing at the new rooftop club downtown. He'd seemed different lately, more attentive, more romantic, and Tasha had allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this relationship was heading somewhere meaningful. She'd even bought new lingerie, hidden beneath her elegant dress, like a secret gift waiting to be unwrapped. The first hour of waiting had been filled with reasonable explanations. Traffic was terrible in the city. His business meeting might have run late. Or perhaps he'd gotten caught up helping his elderly neighbor again. Tasha sipped her water slowly, declining offers from her former co-workers to order appetizers, insisting that Marcus would arrive any moment and they could order together. By 9 o'clock, the reasonable explanations had given way to worry. She'd called him 3 times, each call going straight to voicemail, his cheerful recorded voice now sounding mocking rather than charming. Her text messages remained unread, marked with single gray check marks that felt like tiny daggers to her pride. The other diners had begun to notice her solitary presence, their curious glances burning into her skin like spotlights illuminating her growing humiliation. At the bar, Alexander Cross had been watching this painful scene unfold with increasing discomfort. He'd come to Romano's for a quiet drink after a particularly grueling board meeting, seeking solace in the familiar atmosphere of one of his restaurants. As the owner of Cross Dining Group, a chain of 37 upscale establishments across the country, he often visited his properties unannounced, observing operations from the perspective of a regular customer. Alexander was a man who noticed details. It was what had made him successful in the restaurant business. He'd built his empire from a single-family diner, inherited from his grandmother, transforming it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise through careful attention to customer experience and employee welfare. At 34, he was considered one of the most eligible bachelors in the city. His dark hair and piercing green eyes regularly featured in society magazines, alongside articles about his business acumen and the quote, charitable endeavors. Tonight, however, his attention wasn't focused on service standards or profit margins. Instead, he found himself captivated by the young woman at table 12, her obvious distress tugging at something deep within his chest. He'd heard her conversation with the hostess when she'd arrived, mentioning her birthday and asking for the romantic corner table. He'd watched her face light up as she described her plans to Maria, the evening manager, her excitement infectious even from across the room. Now, 2 hours later, that same face bore the weight of disappointment and growing embarrassment. Alexander had seen her check her phone countless times, had noticed how she'd begun to shrink into herself as other couples were seated and served around her. Her server, Jenny, approached his bar stool during a brief lull in the dining room activity. "That's Tasha," Jenny whispered, following his gaze. "She works here, been with us for years. It's her birthday today, and some jerk stood her up." She's too proud to leave. Keeps insisting he's just running late. Jenny shook her head sadly. She's one of the good ones, you know? Always covers for others when they call in sick. Never complains about difficult customers. She doesn't deserve this. Alexander's jaw tightened. He'd built his business on the principle that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, whether they were customers or employees. Watching someone be humiliated in one of his establishments, especially someone who worked so hard to make others feel welcome, stirred something protective within him. As if sensing his scrutiny, Tasha suddenly looked up from her phone, her eyes meeting his across the restaurant. For a moment, time seemed suspended between them. Her eyes were the color of warm honey, flecked with gold that caught the ambient lighting, and even from a distance, he could see they were bright with unshed tears. She managed a weak smile, the kind that people wear when they're trying to convince the world that everything is fine when it's clearly falling apart. Alexander raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement, a gesture that somehow conveyed both respect and understanding. Tasha's cheeks flushed pink, and she quickly looked away, probably assuming he was just another wealthy customer enjoying the spectacle of her misfortune. She couldn't have been more wrong. At exactly 10:15, Tasha finally accepted the reality of her situation. Marcus wasn't coming. Whatever excuse he might offer later, whatever apology he might attempt, the fact remained that he had abandoned her on her birthday, without so much as a phone call. The weight of this realization settled over her like a heavy blanket, suffocating and inescapable. She signaled to her former colleague, requesting the small birthday cake that the kitchen had prepared for her. If she was going to sit here alone, at least she could salvage something from this disaster. The cake arrived with a single candle, its flame dancing bravely in the restaurant's gentle air conditioning. Jenny had included a small note, "Make a wish, birthday girl. You deserve all the happiness in the world." Tasha closed her eyes and made her wish, though she doubted the universe was listening to her requests anymore. She wished for the strength to start over, to stop settling for men who treated her as an afterthought, to believe that she was worth more than being someone's convenient option. When she opened her eyes and blew out the candle, she felt something shift inside her, a tiny spark of determination amidst the ashes of her disappointment. The cake was delicious, a rich chocolate creation with raspberry filling, but each bite felt like she was swallowing her own pride. Around her, the restaurant continued its elegant dance of service and satisfaction, couples sharing intimate conversations over candlelight, families celebrating special occasions, groups of friends laughing over shared plates. She was an island of solitude in an ocean of connection. Alexander had been nursing the same whiskey for over an hour, his attention divided between his drink and the woman celebrating her birthday alone. He'd watched her blow out the single candle on her cake, had seen the moment when her shoulders straightened with some internal resolve. There was something magnificent about her dignity in the face of such public humiliation, something that reminded him of his grandmother's quiet strength during the hardest years of her life. His grandmother, Helena Cross, had been the most important person in his life. She'd raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12, teaching him that true character was revealed not in moments of triumph, but in moments of adversity. Elena had worked 3 jobs to keep her small diner afloat while raising a grieving adolescent, never once complaining about the sacrifices she was making. "Mijo," she used to say in her heavily accented English, "the measure of a person is not what they have, but what they give when they have nothing left to give." Watching Tasha maintain her composure while her world crumbled around her, Alexander saw echoes of his grandmother's strength. At 10:45, the restaurant began its closing routine. The dinner crowd had thinned considerably, leaving only a few couples lingering over dessert and coffee. Tasha had finished her cake and was preparing to leave, gathering her small purse and checking her reflection one final time in her phone's camera. Even in her disappointment, she took care to tip Jenny generously, understanding the struggles of service industry workers better than most. As she stood to leave, Alexander made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He caught Jenny's attention and requested his check, but not before asking her to wait a moment. Taking out his fountain pen, a gift from his grandmother on his 18th birthday, he began to write on the receipt. The bill came to $47 for his whiskey, and the appetizer he'd barely touched. Alexander looked at the total for a moment, thinking about the woman who'd spent her birthday being reminded that she wasn't worth someone's time. Then he began to write, his handwriting bold and decisive across the tip line. $10,000. Below the astronomical tip, he added a note in the same confident script. No one should celebrate alone. Happy birthday, Tasha. See you soon, AC. Jenny's eyes widened when she saw the receipt, her hands actually trembling as she processed what she was seeing. She looked up at Alexander, who was already standing and putting on his jacket, expensive charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Sir, are you sure about this? Jenny whispered, still staring at the numbers as if they might disappear if she looked away. Alexander smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Please make sure Tasha gets this directly, and tell her that someone noticed her grace tonight. The world needs more people like her. He placed a hand gently on Jenny's shoulder. Then Jenny, this stays between us for now. Let her have this moment without feeling obligated to anyone. With that, Alexander Cross walked out of Romano's Italian bistro, leaving behind a tip that would pay off Tasha's student loans, cover her rent for months, and more importantly, restore her faith that kindness still existed in the world. Jenny stood at the bar for several minutes, staring at the receipt and trying to process what had just happened. She'd been waiting tables for 8 years and had never seen anything like this. Tips of a few $100s were rare, but not unheard of from wealthy regulars. But $10,000 was beyond comprehension. This wasn't just generosity, it was life-changing money. Tasha had already made it to the parking lot when Jenny came running after her, the receipt clutched in her hand like a winning lottery ticket. The cool evening air felt sharp against Tasha's skin, a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere of her failed celebration. She'd been holding back tears for hours, and finally being alone allowed them to flow freely down her cheeks. Tasha! Wait! Jenny called out, her voice carrying across the nearly empty parking lot. You need to see this. Tasha turned, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Jen, I just want to go home. This night has been humiliating enough without— No, you don't understand, Jenny interrupted, practically vibrating with excitement. Look at this. The man at the bar, the one who was watching you all night, he left this for you. She thrust the receipt toward Tasha, who took it reluctantly. At first, the numbers didn't make sense. Her eyes scanned the familiar layout of the restaurant's check, noting the modest food and drink order until they reached the tip line. Then her world tilted sideways. This can't be real, Tasha whispered, her voice barely audible. $10,000? That's impossible. It has to be a mistake. It's real, Jenny assured her, bouncing slightly on her toes. I asked him twice if he was sure. He said he'd never been more certain of anything in his life. And look, there's a note. Tasha's eyes moved to the bottom of the receipt, where elegant handwriting spelled out words that made her heart race. No one should celebrate alone. Happy birthday, Tasha. See you soon. See? Her legs suddenly felt weak, and she had to lean against her car for support. This couldn't be happening. People didn't just give away $10,000 to strangers, especially not to waitresses who'd been publicly humiliated. It had to be some kind of cruel joke, or maybe she was dreaming, still sitting at that table in the restaurant while her subconscious created elaborate fantasies to cope with her disappointment. Who was he? Tasha asked, looking back toward the restaurant as if she might catch a glimpse of her mysterious benefactor. Jenny shrugged. I've never seen him before tonight. Well-dressed, probably mid-30s. Really handsome in that sophisticated way. He had these incredible green eyes and seemed to be watching you most of the evening. When I told him it was your birthday and that you'd been stood up, he looked genuinely angry. Not at you, she added quickly, but at the situation. Tasha stared at the receipt again, her mind struggling to process this turn of events. A few hours ago, she'd been the pathetic woman eating birthday cake alone, while her date ignored her existence. Now she was holding what amounted to a year's salary in tip money from a complete stranger who'd somehow seen past her humiliation to something worth celebrating. AC, she murmured, tracing the initials with her finger. See you soon. What does that mean? Maybe he's planning to come back? Jenny suggested. With that kind of money, he's obviously not hurting financially. He could be a regular customer we just haven't met yet. The drive home passed in a blur of disbelief and cautious hope. Tasha lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in a converted Victorian house, splitting the space with her cat, Luna, a black and white rescue she'd found as a stray kitten behind the restaurant 2 years earlier. The apartment was small but cozy, filled with second-hand furniture she'd carefully restored and plants that thrived under her attentive care. She sat on her couch for hours that night, still wearing her birthday dress, staring at the receipt as if it might reveal more secrets. $10,000 was more money than she'd ever seen in one place. It was enough to pay off her remaining student loans from culinary school, money she'd been slowly chipping away at for years while working double shifts and skipping meals to make ends meet. More than the money, though, was the message. Someone had seen her pain and chosen to respond with extraordinary kindness. In a world that often felt cold and indifferent, this anonymous act of generosity felt like a miracle. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Tasha woke on her couch, still in her dress, with Luna purring on her chest and sunlight streaming through her bedroom windows. For a moment, she wondered if the previous night had been an elaborate dream until she saw the receipt still clutched in her hand. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Sorry about last night, babe. Something came up at the last minute." Rain check? The casual dismissal of her birthday, the complete lack of acknowledgement of how his absence had affected her, crystallized everything she'd been trying to ignore about their relationship. Marcus saw her as convenient, not important. She was someone to call when he was bored or lonely, not someone worth keeping promises to. She deleted his message without responding and blocked his number. Whatever hold he'd had over her heart had been broken by the kindness of a stranger who'd seen her worth when the man who claimed to care about her couldn't be bothered to show up. At Romano's that day, news of the massive tip had spread through the staff like wildfire. The restaurant's manager, David, had been skeptical until he'd run the credit card and confirmed that the transaction was legitimate. He'd worked in hospitality for 15 years and had never seen anything like it. "Tasha, I need to ask you about this," David said, pulling her aside during the lunch rush. "Do you know this customer? Have you served him before?" "I've never seen him in my life," Tasha replied honestly. "I was sitting at table 12 as a customer last night, not working. Jenny said he was at the bar watching, but we never spoke." David frowned, clearly trying to piece together the situation. "The credit card belongs to someone named Alexander Cross. The name doesn't ring any bells?" Tasha shook her head. "Should it? I don't know. It's just, $10,000 is a lot of money to give to someone you don't know. I want to make sure everything's legitimate, that you're not involved in anything that could reflect poorly on the quote, restaurant." The implication stung. Even when receiving unprecedented generosity, Tasha found herself having to justify her worthiness. She straightened her shoulders, channeling the dignity she'd discovered the night before. "David, I've worked here for 4 years without a single complaint or incident. I've never stolen so much as a dinner roll, and I've covered more shifts for other people than I can count. If you have concerns about my character, maybe you should reconsider who you're talking to." David had the grace to look ashamed. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's just unprecedented, and I had to ask. The money is yours, of course. The transaction went through without any issues." That afternoon, Tasha made her first trip to the bank in months. That wasn't to check if her account was overdrawn. The teller's eyes widened when she presented the receipt for deposit, and Tasha found herself explaining the situation for what felt like the 100th time. "So a stranger just gave you $10,000? The teller asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Apparently," Tasha replied, still not quite believing it herself. With her student loans paid off and her rent covered for the next several months, Tasha felt a freedom she'd never experienced as an adult. For the first time since graduating from culinary school, she could think beyond just surviving to the next paycheck. She could plan, dream, maybe even take some risks. The mystery of AC consumed her thoughts. During quiet moments at work, she found herself scanning the restaurant for green eyes and expensive coats, wondering if her anonymous benefactor would return. Jenny had described him as handsome and sophisticated. someone who clearly moved in different circles than the servers and line cooks who made up Tasha's world. A week passed without any sign of the mysterious A.C. Tasha had begun to think that perhaps the note had been metaphorical, that "see you soon" was just a kind sentiment rather than an actual promise. She'd started researching culinary programs in other cities, thinking about using her newfound financial freedom to pursue opportunities she'd only dreamed about before. Then, on a busy Friday evening during the dinner rush, everything changed. Tasha was taking an order from a table of business executives when she noticed a commotion near the host stand. The restaurant's owner, someone she'd never met but had heard about in whispered conversations among the staff, was apparently making an unannounced visit. David and Maria were hovering anxiously as a tall figure in an expensive suit surveyed the dining room. When the man turned toward her section, Tasha's breath caught in her throat. Green eyes met hers across the crowded restaurant, and suddenly she understood everything. The generous tip, the expensive clothes, the quiet confidence that had drawn her attention even in her moment of despair. A.C. Alexander Cross, the owner of Romano's Italian Bistro, and, she was quickly learning from the excited whispers around her, an entire chain of upscale restaurants. He approached her table with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he was used to commanding attention wherever he went. The business executive she'd been serving looked up expectantly, probably assuming he was there to greet them, but his focus remained entirely on Tasha. "Good evening," he said, his voice warm and slightly amused. "I believe we have some things to discuss." Tasha's mind went blank. Standing before her was possibly the most attractive man she'd ever seen up close, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and those green eyes that had haunted her dreams for a week were even more striking in person. You're... she stammered, very aware that her other customers were watching this interaction with growing curiosity. "Alexander Cross," he said, extending his hand. "And you're Tasha Rodriguez, the woman who handled disappointment with more grace than most people handle success." His handshake was firm and warm, and Tasha felt a jolt of electricity at the contact. This was really happening. The man who'd changed her life with a single gesture was standing in front of her, looking at her like she was the most important person in the room. "Could I have a word with you?" Alexander asked. "Privately, when you have a moment." Tasha looked around at her tables, most of which had been served and were working through their meals. My shift doesn't end for another hour." "Actually," David appeared beside them, slightly out of breath. "Tasha, why don't you take your break now? Jenny can cover your section." It wasn't really a suggestion. When the owner of the restaurant chain wanted to speak with one of the servers, schedules became remarkably flexible. Tasha untied her apron with trembling hands, hyper-aware of the curious stares from both customers and co-workers. Alexander led her to a quiet corner booth, the same section where she'd celebrated her birthday alone just a week earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "First," Alexander said once they were seated, "I owe you an apology. I should have introduced myself that night, instead of leading you to wonder about my motives." "You don't owe me anything," Tasha replied, finding her voice. "You gave me more than I could have ever imagined. I should be thanking you, not the other way around." Alexander smiled, and Tasha felt her heart skip a beat. "You thanked me by not making a scene, by not treating it like you were owed something. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" "Rare?" Tasha frowned. "I don't understand. Most people, when they receive unexpected wealth, immediately assume they deserve it, or that it comes with strings attached. You paid off your debts, covered your basic needs, and then started planning for your future. You didn't quit your job, didn't go on a shopping spree, didn't even tell most people what happened." Tasha stared at him in confusion. "How do you know what I did with the money?" Alexander had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I may have asked David to keep an eye on things, make sure you were okay. When someone makes a significant impact on your life, you want to know they're thriving." "I made an impact on your life?" The question slipped out before Tasha could stop herself. "I don't understand. I was just a woman having the worst birthday of her adult life." Alexander leaned forward, his expression serious. "You were a woman showing incredible dignity in the face of public humiliation. You were kind to your server despite your own pain. You tipped generously even though you were clearly struggling financially, and you maintained your composure when anyone else would have fallen apart. Do you think those are common qualities? Tasha thought about Marcus, about the way he dismissed her birthday like it was an inconvenience, about the customers who treated her like she was invisible, the men who'd asked her out and then expected her to be grateful for their mediocre attention. Maybe not as common as they should be, she admitted. Exactly. Alexander's smile returned. Which brings me to why I'm here. I have a proposition for you. Tasha's stomach clenched. Despite his kindness, despite the genuine warmth in his eyes, she'd learned to be wary of propositions from wealthy men. What kind of proposition? A professional one, Alexander said quickly, reading her expression. I'm opening a new restaurant in the Arts District, something more intimate and focused on farm-to-table cuisine. I need someone to help me develop the concept. Someone who understands both the service side and the customer experience. I'd like you to consider coming to work for me. As a waitress? Tasha asked, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. As an assistant manager, with the potential to move into full management once the restaurant is established. The position would come with a significant salary increase, full benefits, and the opportunity to be involved in every aspect of the restaurant's development. End quote. Tasha's head spun. A week ago, she'd been a waitress whose biggest aspiration was making rent on time. Now she was being offered a management position by one of the most successful restaurateurs in the city. Why me? She asked. I don't have management experience. I never even finished culinary school. You have something more valuable than a degree, Alexander replied. You have empathy. You understand what it feels like to be overlooked, undervalued, dismissed. Those experiences would make you an exceptional manager because you'd never let your employees feel that way. And he paused, studying her face. Besides, from what I understand, you left culinary school for financial reasons, not academic ones. This position would allow you to finish your education if you wanted, with the company covering the costs. Tasha felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. It was too much, too generous, too good to be true. I don't understand why you're doing this. The tip was already beyond generous. Now you're offering me a career? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. My grandmother raised me after my parents died. She worked herself to the bone keeping her little restaurant afloat while making sure I had everything I needed. She taught me that success meant nothing if you didn't use it to lift others up. He looked around the restaurant, his expression softening. This whole company started with her one small diner. Every restaurant I open, every person I hire, it's all built on the foundation she laid. When I saw you that night, maintaining your dignity despite being treated poorly, I saw her strength. I saw someone worth investing in. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over. Tasha wiped them away quickly, embarrassed to be crying in front of this man who seemed to have his entire life perfectly controlled. Hey, Alexander said gently, reaching across the table to offer her his handkerchief. It's okay to be overwhelmed. This is a big decision. It's not just the decision, Tasha said, accepting the handkerchief gratefully. It's everything. A week ago, I thought I wasn't worth showing up for. Now you're telling me I'm worth investing in. It's hard to process. The man who stood you up made a choice that says everything about him and nothing about you, Alexander said firmly. His inability to see your worth doesn't diminish it. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the restaurant creating a gentle backdrop to their conversation. Tasha studied Alexander's face, looking for any sign that this was some elaborate joke, or that he had ulterior motives. All she saw was sincerity and patience. If I said yes, she said slowly, when would this start? The new location won't be ready for another 3 months, but I'd want you to start immediately. There's a lot of planning and development work to be done, and I'd like your input on everything from the menu to the interior design. You'd want my input? Tasha couldn't hide her surprise. I'm a waitress. You're a server who's worked in this industry for years, who understands what customers want and what makes their experience memorable. Your perspective is invaluable. Alexander leaned back in his seat. Plus, from what David tells me, You have excellent instincts about food and service. Apparently, you've made several suggestions over the years that improved operations here. Tasha flushed, remembering the time she'd suggested changing the bread service to include herb butter, or when she'd recommended adjusting the lighting in the bar area to create a more intimate atmosphere. She'd never thought anyone in management had noticed her input. "So, what do you say?" Alexander asked. "Are you ready to take a leap of faith?" Tasha thought about her small apartment, her modest dreams, the way she'd been playing it safe for so long that she'd forgotten what taking risks felt like. Then she thought about her grandmother's advice, something her abuela had told her before she passed away. "Mija, when opportunity knocks, don't just answer the door. Invite it in for dinner." "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Yes, I'd like to accept your offer." Alexander's smile was radiant. "Excellent. I'll have my assistant prepare the paperwork, and we can discuss the details early next week. In the meantime, I have one more question." "What's that?" "Would you like to have dinner with me? Not as an employer and employee, just as two people who've had an interesting week." Tasha's heart raced. "Are you asking me on a date?" "I'm asking if you'd like to share a meal with someone who finds you fascinating and would like to get to know you better outside of a professional context." It was the most eloquent way anyone had ever asked her out, and despite everything that had happened, Tasha found herself hesitating. The last time she'd gotten dressed up for dinner with someone, she'd ended up humiliated and alone. Alexander seemed to understand her hesitation. "Tell you what, let's start small. There's a little cafe near my office that makes excellent coffee and serves pastries that could make grown men weep. Would you meet me there tomorrow morning? Consider it a working breakfast where we can discuss your new position." The compromise felt safer, more manageable. "I'd like that." "Perfect." Alexander stood, then paused. "Tasha, thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me that there are still good people in the world worth believing in." After Alexander left, Tasha sat in the booth for several more minutes, trying to process everything that had just happened. Her life had just changed dramatically for the second time in a week, and she wasn't sure her heart could handle much more excitement. Jenny appeared at her table, practically vibrating with curiosity. "Okay, spill. What was that about? And please tell me you're not in trouble." "I'm not in trouble," Tasha assured her. "Quite the opposite, actually." She explained about the job offer, watching Jenny's expressions cycle through disbelief, excitement, and finally, a mixture of happiness and sadness. "I'm thrilled for you," Jenny said. "But I'm going to miss working with you. This place won't be the same without you." "I'll still be in the company," Tasha pointed out. "And once the new restaurant opens, maybe there will be positions available for experienced servers who know how to take care of people." Jenny's eyes lit up. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that good people should work together whenever possible." The next morning, Tasha stood outside the cafe Alexander had mentioned, checking her reflection in the storefront window for the 5th time. She'd chosen a simple but elegant outfit, a navy dress with a cardigan. Professional enough for a business meeting, but pretty enough for whatever this was turning into. Alexander was already inside, seated at a table by the window with 2 cups of coffee and what looked like enough pastries to feed a small army. He stood when he saw her, pulling out her chair with old-fashioned gallantry that made her heart flutter. "I wasn't sure what you liked," he said, gesturing to the spread, "so I ordered one of everything." "This is enough food for 6 people, Tasha laughed, settling into her chair. "Good thing I have a healthy appetite," Alexander replied with a grin. "Plus, I wanted to make sure you tried their almond croissants. They're life-changing." As they shared breakfast and talked about the new restaurant concept, Tasha found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't expected. Alexander was nothing like the wealthy customers she'd served over the years, the ones who treated service staff like invisible furniture. He asked about her opinions, listened to her ideas, and seemed genuinely interested in her perspective on everything from menu pricing to employee scheduling. "I want this place to feel like home," Alexander explained, sketching rough layouts on napkins. "Not in the casual way, but in the sense that everyone who walks through the door feels welcomed and valued. Staff and customers alike." "Like your grandmother's diner?" Tasha asked. Alexander's expression softened. "Exactly like that." She had this gift for making everyone feel like they belonged, whether they were ordering the most expensive item on the menu or just coming in for coffee and pie. What happened to the diner? I still own it, actually. It's the flagship location, though we've expanded it significantly over the years. Elena's, he said proudly. Named after my grandmother. Every restaurant in the chain carries forward something she taught me about hospitality. They talked for over 2 hours, long past the point where their coffee had grown cold and the pastries had been reduced to crumbs. Tasha found herself sharing stories about her own family, her dreams of opening her own place someday, her struggles with self-doubt and financial stress. You know, Alexander said as they prepared to leave, I've been in this business for over a decade, and I've never had a more productive planning session over breakfast pastries. Is that what this was? Tasha asked teasingly. A planning session? Alexander's smile turned slightly mischievous. Among other things, tell me, what are you doing for lunch? Working, presumably. I still have a job at Romanos until I start with you. Actually, I called David this morning and arranged for you to have the weekend off. Consider it a signing bonus. Tasha stared at him. You can't just rearrange my schedule. I can when it's my restaurant and I'm offering one of my employees a better opportunity, Alexander replied reasonably. Besides, I thought you might like to see the space where you'll be working. An hour later, they stood in an empty storefront in the Arts District, surrounded by exposed brick walls and dramatic floor-to-ceiling windows. The space was raw and unfinished, but Tasha could immediately see its potential. Natural light flooded through the windows, casting interesting shadows across the concrete floors, and the high ceilings gave the room an airy, spacious feeling that would be perfect for intimate dining. What do you think? Alexander asked, watching her face as she took in the space. Tasha walked slowly through the empty room, her footsteps echoing off the bare walls. She could envision everything, the way tables might be arranged to take advantage of the natural light, how the exposed brick could be softened with warm lighting and carefully chosen artwork, where the open kitchen might be positioned to create theater without overwhelming the dining experience. It's perfect, she said finally. The bones are incredible. You could create something really special here. We could create something special here, Alexander corrected gently. This is going to be as much your vision as mine. The weight of that responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. Tasha had spent years watching other people make decisions about the restaurants where she worked, often disagreeing with choices that prioritized profit over customer experience or efficiency over employee welfare. Now she was being given the opportunity to help build something from the ground up, to create the kind of workplace she'd always wished she could be part of. They spent the afternoon walking through the space, Alexander sketching possibilities, while Tasha pointed out practical considerations he might not have thought of. Where would servers keep their station supplies? How would the flow work during busy periods? What about accessibility for customers with mobility challenges? You have an excellent eye for detail, Alexander observed, as Tasha suggested modifications to his proposed bar layout. Have you ever considered going back to school for restaurant management? I've thought about it, Tasha admitted. But between work schedules and finances, it never seemed possible. Well, that's changed now, hasn't it? Alexander set down his pen and looked at her seriously. I meant what I said about the company covering educational expenses. There's an excellent hospitality management program at the Culinary Institute downtown. Part-time evening classes designed for working bar professionals. The idea sent a thrill of excitement through Tasha's chest. She'd dreamed of finishing her education for years, but had resigned herself to the reality that it would probably never happen. The $10,000 tip had freed her from immediate financial stress, but this job offer was opening doors she'd never thought possible. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like that very much. As the afternoon wore on, their conversation shifted from purely professional to more personal. Alexander told her about his early struggles taking over the family business, the mistakes he'd made, and the lessons he'd learned. Tasha shared her own journey, from the small Texas town where she'd grown up to the big city dreams that had brought her to Romanos. What made you want to work in restaurants? Alexander asked as they sat on the makeshift seating he'd created from construction materials. My grandmother, actually, Tasha replied. She was an incredible cook. The kind of woman who could make magic happen with whatever ingredients she had on hand. Sunday dinners at her house were legendary in our neighborhood. People would just show up. And somehow, she always had enough food for everyone. She smiled at the memory. I remember being maybe 7 years old, standing on a chair in her kitchen, helping her roll out tortillas. She told me that food wasn't just about nutrition, it was about love. That when you cooked for someone, you were giving them a piece of your heart. She sounds like she would have gotten along well with my grandmother, Alexander said. But Leiby used to say that a restaurant wasn't a business, it was a community gathering place that happened to serve food. What would she think of all this? Tasha gestured around the empty space. The empire you've built? Alexander was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. I think she'd be proud of the success, but more importantly, I think she'd be proud that I haven't forgotten why we do this. It's not about the money or the recognition. It's about creating spaces where people can connect, celebrate, find comfort. Is that why you helped me? Tasha asked. Because you saw someone who needed comfort? Partly, Alexander admitted. But also, because I saw someone who understood what hospitality really means. The way you treated Jenny that night, making sure to tip her well despite your own disappointment, that told me everything I needed to know. About your character. They were sitting closer now. The afternoon light casting golden highlights in Tasha's hair, and making Alexander's green eyes appear almost luminous. There was a moment of silence that felt charged with possibility, and Tasha found herself wondering what it would be like to kiss this man who had turned her world upside down in the most wonderful way. Before either of them could act on the tension building between them, Alexander's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He glanced at it and sighed. Crisis at the downtown location, he explained apologetically. The head chef decided to quit in the middle of the dinner rush, and my general manager is having a panic attack. You should go, Tasha said, though she felt disappointed by the interruption. I should, Alexander agreed, but he made no move to leave. Tasha, I want to ask you something, and I want you to feel completely free to say no. Okay. There's a charity gala next Saturday night. One of those overpriced affairs where wealthy people eat mediocre food and congratulate themselves for writing checks. I have to attend because several of my restaurants are sponsoring the event, but I hate going to these things alone. Tasha's heart started racing. Are you asking me to be your date? I'm asking if you'd like to accompany me to a boring social obligation that would be significantly less boring with good company, Alexander said with a self-deprecating smile. Fair warning. It involves formal wear, small talk with people you'll probably find insufferable, and a rubber chicken dinner that costs more per plate than most people spend on groceries in a month. Despite his less than enthusiastic description, Tasha found herself nodding. It sounds terrible. I'd love to go. Alexander's face lit up. Really? You're not just saying that to be polite? I'm saying yes because a week ago I was eating birthday cake alone, and now the most interesting man I've ever met is asking me to attend a fancy party with him. Even if the food is terrible, it beats my usual Saturday night plans. Which are? Doing laundry and watching cooking shows while eating takeout Chinese food. Alexander laughed, a rich, warm sound that made Tasha's stomach flutter. Well, I can promise you the evening will be more entertaining than that, even if the entertainment value comes from mocking the pretentious guests. His phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. I really do have to go, he said reluctantly. But Tasha? Thank you for saying yes to the job, for agreeing to suffer through a charity gala with me, for being exactly the person I hoped you were. After he left, Tasha remained in the empty restaurant space for another hour, trying to process the rapid changes in her life. 2 weeks ago, her biggest concern had been whether she could afford to replace her worn-out work shoes. Now, she was planning a career change, considering going back to school, and preparing to attend a high-society event with a man who made her pulse race just by looking at her. The next week passed in a blur of paperwork, meetings, and preparation. Alexander had been true to his word about involving her in every aspect of the new restaurant's development. She found herself in meetings with architects, reviewing proposals from local farms for produce suppliers, and even sitting in on interviews for potential staff members. The work was challenging and exhilarating, nothing like the routine of taking orders and serving food. Alexander treated her opinions with respect, often asking for her input before making major decisions. When she suggested modifications to the proposed kitchen layout that would improve efficiency during busy periods, he implemented them immediately. When she recommended a local artist whose work would be perfect for the dining room walls, he arranged a meeting that same day. "You're a natural at this," he told her after a particularly productive meeting with their contractor. "Have you given any thought to what you'd like your official title to be once we open?" Tasha had been thinking about it actually. "Assistant General Manager seems appropriate for now. I want to earn the promotion to General Manager, rather than just being handed it." "Fair enough," Alexander agreed. "Though I have a feeling it won't take long for you to prove yourself ready for more responsibility." Throughout the week, their relationship had remained professional, but Tasha couldn't ignore the undercurrent of attraction that seemed to grow stronger with each interaction. Alexander was unfailingly respectful, never crossing any lines or making her feel uncomfortable, but she caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression that made her think he was fighting the same internal battle she was. The question of whether their connection was purely professional or something more was about to be answered at the charity gala. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October. Tasha had spent the afternoon getting ready, a process that had involved 3 trips to different stores before finding the perfect dress. She'd finally settled on a deep emerald green gown that complemented her skin tone and made her feel elegant rather than overdressed. When Alexander arrived to pick her up, his reaction made all the preparation worthwhile. He stood in her doorway for a full 10 seconds without speaking, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. "You look absolutely stunning," he said finally, his voice slightly hoarse. "Thank you," Tasha replied, suddenly shy. Alexander looked incredible himself, in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean build. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The gala was being held at the city's most exclusive hotel, a grand ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers and elaborate flower arrangements. Tasha had never been anywhere so opulent, and she felt momentarily intimidated by the obvious wealth surrounding them. "Remember," Alexander murmured as they made their way through the crowd, "most of these people are more interested in being seen than in actually helping anyone. Don't let them intimidate you." "How did you know I was feeling intimidated?" "Because you're gripping my arm like you're about to fall off a cliff," Alexander replied with amusement. "Relax. You belong here just as much as anyone else." The evening began with cocktails and networking, a process that Alexander navigated with practiced ease. He introduced Tasha to dozens of people, always presenting her as his colleague and partner in the new restaurant venture. Several people seemed surprised that he'd brought a date who wasn't a socialite or model, but Alexander's obvious pride in her accomplishments quickly silenced any raised eyebrows. "Tasha has incredible insights into customer experience," he told a group of fellow restaurateurs. "She's going to help us create something really special." During dinner, they were seated at a table with other business owners and their partners. The conversation ranged from local politics to investment opportunities, topics that Tasha would normally have found intimidating. But Alexander's presence beside her gave her confidence, and she found herself participating more naturally than she'd expected. "What's your background, dear?" asked Mrs. Wellington, the wife of a prominent real estate developer. The question was polite on the surface, but Tasha detected an undertone of condescension. "I've been working in the restaurant industry for several years," Tasha replied calmly. "Most recently as a server at Romano's Italian Bistro." "Oh, how nice," Mrs. Wellington said with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It must be quite a change, going from serving tables to attending events like this." The comment was clearly meant to put Tasha in her place, to remind her that she didn't belong in this rarefied social circle. Before Tasha could respond, Alexander's voice cut through the awkward silence. "Actually, Tasha's experience in service gives her insights that most people in this room couldn't dream of having," he said, his tone pleasant but firm. "She understands what creates memorable experiences for customers because she's been creating them for years. That kind of expertise is invaluable." "Of course," Mrs. Wellington backtracked quickly, recognizing that she'd overstepped. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. Under the table, Alexander's hand found Tasha's, giving it a gentle squeeze of support. The gesture was small but significant, a reminder that they were partners in this social minefield. After dinner, there was dancing to a live orchestra. Tasha hadn't danced with a partner in years, but Alexander was an excellent lead, guiding her smoothly across the floor with confident ease. "Thank you," she said as they swayed to a slow ballad, "for defending me back there." "You didn't need defending," Alexander replied. "You handled yourself perfectly. But I couldn't let that woman's rudeness go unchallenged." Is this what these events are always like? People trying to determine each other's worth based on their bank accounts? Unfortunately, yes. It's why I usually avoid them when possible. Alexander spun her gently, then drew her back into his arms. But tonight has been different. Better. Because of the company? Definitely because of the company. His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "Tasha, I need to tell you something." The song was ending, and couples around them were beginning to leave the dance floor. Alexander led her to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the crowd and the noise. "What is it?" Tasha asked, her heart racing at his serious expression. "I need you to know that my interest in you isn't purely professional," Alexander said, his green eyes intense in the dim lighting. "I tried to keep things strictly business, but I can't pretend anymore that I don't feel something more." Tasha's breath caught. "Alexander, I know this complicates things," he continued. "You work for me now, and I don't want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. If you'd prefer to keep our relationship strictly professional, I'll respect that completely. What if I don't want to keep it strictly professional?" Tasha asked softly. Alexander's expression shifted, hope replacing uncertainty. "Then I'd like very much to take you on a real date, somewhere without rubber chicken or pretentious small talk." "I'd like that too," Tasha admitted. "But you're right about it being complicated. What happens if things don't work out between us personally? I don't want to lose this opportunity because we tried to mix business with pleasure." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "That's a fair concern. What if we agreed to take things slowly, see how we feel about each other while keeping the professional relationship separate? If at any point either of us feels uncomfortable, we can step back without it affecting your career." "You'd do that? Risk losing whatever this is to protect my job?" "Tasha, your career and financial security are more important than my personal feelings. I won't be the reason you lose an opportunity to build the life you want." "You want." The sincerity in his voice, the way he put her needs before his own desires, made Tasha's decision easy. "I'd like to try," she said. "Both the personal and professional relationship, but slowly, like you said." Alexander's smile was radiant. "In that case, would you like to get out of here? I know a little diner that's open late, the kind of place where the coffee is strong and the pie is homemade." "That sounds perfect," Tasha laughed. "Though I feel a little overdressed for diner food. Trust me, you'll fit right in. It's Elena's, my grandmother's original place. The staff there has seen me in everything from three-piece suits to paint-splattered jeans." An hour later, they sat in a booth at Elena's diner, still in their formal wear but sharing a slice of apple pie and talking like old friends. The diner was nothing like the opulent ballroom they'd just left, with its worn vinyl seats and mismatched coffee mugs, but Tasha felt more comfortable here than she had all evening. "This is where it all started," Alexander said, gesturing around the cozy space. "My grandmother bought this place in 1962 with money she'd saved from working in other people's kitchens. She was 23 years old and didn't speak much English, but she knew how to make people feel welcome." "I can feel it," Tasha said, looking around at the framed family photos and handwritten menu specials taped to the walls. "There's so much love in this place." "She'd like you," Alexander said with certainty. "She always said the most important ingredient in any recipe was caring about the people you were feeding." They talked until the diner closed at 2 in the morning, covering everything from their childhood dreams to their fears about the future. By the time Alexander walked Tasha to her door, any awkwardness about their shifting relationship had disappeared. "Thank you," Tasha said as they stood on her doorstep. for the most interesting evening I've ever had. Thank you for making a boring charity obligation into something I'll remember for the rest of my life," Alexander Cree replied. There was a moment when they both leaned slightly forward, when a kiss seemed inevitable and natural. But then, Alexander stepped back, his expression regretful but determined. "Slowly," he reminded her gently. "We agreed to take this slowly." Tasha nodded, though part of her wanted to throw caution to the wind and see where the evening might lead. "Slowly," she agreed. But as she watched him drive away and then got ready for bed, Tasha couldn't help but smile. 6 months ago, her life had felt stuck in an endless cycle of work and financial stress. Now, she was embarking on a new career, potentially returning to school, and developing feelings for a man who treated her like she was precious. The transformation had started with a moment of public humiliation, but it was leading to possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. Sometimes, Tasha reflected, as she finally fell asleep, the worst nights of your life were actually the beginning of the best chapters. Over the following weeks, Alexander proved true to his word about taking things slowly. Their relationship developed naturally through shared work on the restaurant project, occasional dinners at Elena's diner, and long conversations about everything from menu development to their personal histories. The new restaurant, which they decided to name Harvest, was taking shape beautifully. The construction was ahead of schedule. The staff hiring was progressing well, and early buzz in the local food community was overwhelmingly positive. Tasha found herself working longer hours than she ever had at Romanos, but unlike the mindless repetition of her previous job, every day brought new challenges and opportunities to learn. "You're a natural leader," Alexander observed one afternoon as they finished interviewing potential sous chefs. "Did you see how that last candidate relaxed once you started asking questions? You're the gift for making people feel comfortable." "I just remember what it was like to be on the other side of those interviews," Tasha replied. "Desperate for work, trying to prove your worth, taking a chance on. And that empathy is exactly why you're going to be an excellent manager." The compliment warmed Tasha more than any expensive gift could have. Recognition of her abilities, respect for her judgment, the opportunity to grow and contribute meaningfully, these were luxuries she'd never experienced in previous jobs. Their personal relationship was progressing just as thoughtfully. Alexander was unfailingly respectful, never pushing for more than Tasha was ready to give, but making it clear through his actions and attention that his interest in her was serious and growing stronger. He brought her coffee every morning, not expensive lattes from trendy shops, but simple black coffee from Elena's diner, served in a thermos that stayed warm for hours. He remembered details about her life that even close friends sometimes forgot, asking about her cat Luna, her ongoing efforts to help her parents with their mortgage, her progress in the evening management classes she'd started taking. "How are the classes going?" he asked one evening, as they shared dinner at a quiet neighborhood restaurant they'd discovered together. "Challenging but incredible," Tasha replied. "I'm learning so much about the business side of hospitality, financial planning, staff management, marketing strategies, things I've been doing instinctively for years, but now I understand the theory behind them." "Any regrets about not finishing school earlier?" Tasha considered the question. "I used to think I was behind, like I'd wasted years of my life just surviving instead of building something. But now I realize that all those experiences were preparing me for this. I understand this industry in ways that people who went straight from school to management never will." End quote. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "My grandmother used to say that there are two kinds of education, the kind you get from books and the kind you get from living. The most successful people combine both." "Speaking of your grandmother, when do I get to see more pictures of her? You talk about her so often, but I've only seen that one photo in your office." Alexander's eyes lit up. "Actually, I have something to show you." He drove her to Elena's diner after it had closed for the evening, letting them in through the back entrance. The dining room looked different in the darkness, more intimate and mysterious. Alexander led her to a wall she'd never paid much attention to before, covered with framed photographs spanning several decades. "This is Elena's wall of fame," he said, turning on a small spotlight that illuminated the collection. "Everyone who worked here, every family celebration, every milestone. She documented everything. The photographs told a story of a life dedicated to community and family. There was a young Elena behind the original counter, her dark hair pinned back and her smile radiant with pride. Pictures of regular customers celebrating anniversaries and birthdays, staff members at holiday parties, children growing up over the years as their families continued to frequent the diner. "She's beautiful," Tasha said, studying a photograph of Elena with a young Alexander, probably around 10 years old. "You have her eyes, and her stubborn streak, according to everyone who knew us both," Alexander replied with a laugh. "She would have loved meeting you. She always said she could judge a person's character by how they treated service workers." "Well, I hope I would have passed that test. With flying colors." Alexander turned to face her, his expression serious. "Tasha, there's something I want to ask you." "What is it?" "Harvest opens in 6 weeks. I know we agreed to take things slowly, but I was hoping you might consider taking a weekend trip with me before we get completely consumed with opening preparations." Tasha's heart raced. A weekend trip felt like a significant step forward in their relationship, the kind of intimate time together that would either bring them closer or reveal incompatibilities they hadn't discovered yet. "Where were you thinking?" she asked. "There's a small town about 3 hours north of here, wine country. My company is considering opening a location there. And I thought we could combine a business scouting trip with some personal time. Separate rooms, no pressure, just a chance to spend some uninterrupted time together away from work in the city." The offer was tempting, and Alexander's careful assurance about separate accommodations showed his continued respect for the pace she was comfortable with. "I'd like that," Tasha said. "When were you thinking?" "Next weekend? We could drive up Friday afternoon, spend Saturday exploring the area and maybe visiting some local restaurants, and drive back Sunday evening." "It's a date." "It's a date." Tasha agreed, then blushed at her choice of words. Alexander's smile was tender. "Yes, it is." The weekend trip to wine country exceeded all of Tasha's expectations. Alexander had booked them rooms at a charming bed and breakfast run by a couple who'd retired from the restaurant business in San Francisco. The place was cozy without being precious, elegant without being pretentious. Exactly the kind of establishment that made guests feel like welcomed friends rather than anonymous customers. They spent Saturday touring the area, visiting local restaurants, and talking to owners about the challenges and opportunities of operating in a smaller market. But the business aspects of the trip quickly took a back seat to the simple pleasure of spending uninterrupted time together. "Look at this view," Tasha said as they stood on a hilltop overlooking rolling vineyards that stretched to the horizon. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and the air carried the scent of ripening grapes and wildflowers. "It's beautiful," Alexander agreed, but when Tasha glanced at him, she realized he was looking at her rather than the landscape. "The view is that way," she said softly, pointing toward the vineyards. "I'm looking at the view I prefer," Alexander replied, his voice warm with affection. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities. This time, when Alexander stepped closer, Tasha didn't step away. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered without words. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "Was that too fast?" Alexander asked, his forehead resting against hers. "It was perfect timing," Tasha replied, her heart racing with happiness rather than anxiety. That evening, they had dinner at a small restaurant overlooking a vineyard, sharing courses and talking until the staff began stacking chairs around them. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the wine, covering dreams and fears, childhood memories, and future plans. "I never expected this," Tasha said as they walked back to the bed and breakfast under a sky brilliant with stars. "What specifically?" "Any of it. The job, this trip, you. 3 months ago, I thought I knew what my life was going to look like. Work, bills, maybe eventually saving enough money to take a vacation or move to a slightly better apartment. I never imagined anything like this was possible." Alexander stopped walking and turned to face her. "I never imagined meeting someone who would make me reconsider everything I thought I knew about what I wanted in life." "What did you think you wanted?" "Success, recognition, building the business into something that would make my grandmother proud. I achieved most of that, but I was starting to realize it felt hollow without someone to share it with. And now? And now? Now I found someone who makes the success meaningful because she understands what it took to achieve it. Someone who appreciates the business because she's lived the struggles that inspired me to build it better. They kissed again outside her room, longer this time, with the promise of deeper intimacy in the future. But when Alexander walked her to her door, he stopped there, respecting the boundaries they'd established, even as both of them clearly wanted more. "Thank you," Tasha said, "for the most perfect day I've ever had. Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to be genuinely happy," Alexander replied. The drive home Sunday evening was comfortable and relaxed, both of them processing the shift in their relationship while discussing practical plans for the restaurant opening. They'd crossed a line during the weekend, moving from colleagues with mutual attraction to two people genuinely falling in love. But somehow, it felt natural rather than complicated. "Are you nervous about opening night?" Alexander asked as they entered the city limits. "Terrified," Tasha admitted, "but also excited. We've built something really special, haven't we?" "We have. And no matter what happens between us personally, I want you to know that professionally, you've exceeded every expectation I had. Harvest is going to be successful because of your contributions. What happens if we mess this up?" "Oh," Tasha asked quietly. "The personal side, I mean." Alexander reached over and took her hand. "We won't mess it up. We're both too invested in making this work, both personally and professionally. We'll figure it out together." The confidence in his voice, the certainty that they could navigate whatever challenges lay ahead, made Tasha believe that maybe, for the first time in her adult life, she'd found something worth the risk of getting hurt. As they pulled up outside her apartment building, Tasha realized that her greatest fear wasn't that their relationship might not work out. Her greatest fear was how much she was beginning to depend on Alexander's presence in her life, how quickly he'd become essential to her happiness and sense of purpose. But as he kissed her goodnight and promised to see her first thing Monday morning, Tasha decided that some risks were worth taking. Some people were worth the vulnerability required to love them completely. 6 weeks later, Harvest opened to a packed house and rave reviews. The evening was a triumph of planning, teamwork, and the kind of hospitality that made guests feel like they were part of something special rather than just customers purchasing a meal. Tasha moved through the dining room with confidence and grace, overseeing service while making sure every guest felt welcomed and valued. Alexander watched her work with obvious pride, seeing his initial instincts about her abilities validated in real time. "She's incredible," the food critic from the city's most influential newspaper told Alexander during a quiet moment. "Your front-of-house manager has impeccable instincts. Every interaction I've witnessed has been perfectly calibrated to enhance the guest experience without feeling scripted or artificial." At the end of the evening, after the last customer had left and the staff had finished cleaning, Tasha and Alexander stood alone in their beautiful restaurant, exhausted but triumphant. "We did it," Tasha said, looking around at the space they'd transformed from an empty storefront into a thriving business. "You did it," Alexander corrected. "This success belongs to you as much as it does to me." "Does this mean I get that promotion to general manager?" Tasha asked teasingly. "Actually," Alexander said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I have something better than a promotion." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Tasha's breath caught in her throat. "Alexander, I know it's fast," he said quickly. "And I know we agreed to take things slowly. But Tasha, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You're my partner in every way that matters. You've made me a better person and better businessman. You've shown me what it means to build something meaningful with someone who shares your values and your dreams." He dropped to one knee in the middle of their restaurant, surrounded by the soft glow of candles that hadn't yet been extinguished. "Tasha Rodriguez, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in life the same way you've become my partner in this business?" Tasha looked down at this incredible man who'd seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself, who'd given her opportunities she'd never dreamed possible, who'd loved her with patience and respect and unwavering support. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring was perfect, a classic solitaire that caught the candlelight and threw tiny rainbows across the walls. But more perfect was the way Alexander's face lit up when she said yes, the way he stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around in the restaurant they'd built together. "I love you," he said, setting her down gently. "I love you too," Tasha replied, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. As they kissed in the restaurant that had brought them together, Tasha thought about the night that had started this incredible journey. She'd been a woman eating birthday cake alone, abandoned by someone who couldn't see her value. Now she was engaged to a man who not only saw her worth, but had helped her build a life that reflected it. Sometimes, the worst nights really were the beginning of the best chapters. Sometimes, kindness from strangers changed everything. And sometimes, when you stopped settling for less than you deserved, the universe conspired to give you more than you'd ever dared to hope for. The story that had begun with humiliation and ended with triumph wasn't just about a generous tip or a career opportunity. It was about recognizing that everyone deserves to be valued, celebrated, and loved completely. It was about the power of kindness to transform lives and the courage required to believe that you're worth the good things that come your way. As Tasha looked around Harvest, their successful restaurant filled with the lingering warmth of a perfect opening night, she realized that this was just the beginning. There would be more restaurants, more opportunities to create spaces where people felt welcomed and valued. There would be a wedding to plan, a life to build together, perhaps children to raise with the same values that had brought her and Alexander together. The $10,000 tip had changed her life, but the love she'd found had transformed her understanding of what was possible. She was no longer the woman who accepted being stood up as somehow deserved. She was a successful businesswoman, a valued partner, a person worthy of extraordinary love and incredible opportunities. And it had all started with a stranger who noticed her pain and chose to respond with unprecedented kindness. In a world that often felt harsh and indifferent, that single act of generosity had created ripples that would last a lifetime. As they turned off the lights and locked up their restaurant, heading home together to plan their future, Tasha sent up a silent thank you to the universe that had brought Alexander Cross into her life, at exactly the moment when she needed to remember that she was worth so much more than she'd been accepting. The story was complete, but the life they were building together was just beginning. And Tasha had never been more excited to see what came next.